Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, June 20th, 2023. Hunter Biden, son of President Joe Biden, reaches a deal with federal prosecutors to plead guilty to misdemeanor charges of failure to pay federal income taxes and to enter a pretrial diversion agreement to avoid prosecution for a felony for illegally possessing a firearm. We'll have congressional reaction just ahead. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi visiting Washington this week. It includes a state dinner at the White House and addressing a joint session of Congress. But some in Congress are concerned about India's human rights record. We'll hear from White House spokesperson John Kirby and talk with Reuters congressional reporter Patricia Zengerle. Almost 1 year since the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision that overturned the Roe v. Wade constitutional right to abortion, the House Republican caucus chair Elise Stefanik and First Lady Jill Biden talking about the abortion issue and where it stands. And President Joe Biden holding a meeting with researchers and advocates on artificial intelligence, meeting in San Francisco, talking about how to address the potential downsides of this powerful technology, including the spread of misinformation, privacy violations, and economic disruption. From United Press International, attorneys for Hunter Biden said Tuesday he will plead guilty to 2 federal offenses connected with his taxes and businesses. Delaware U.S. Attorney David Weiss's office said that Hunter Biden, the son of President Joe Biden, faced misdemeanor charges of failing to pay federal income taxes in 2017 and 18, despite owing more than $100,000 in taxes each year. It also said Hunter Biden possessed a firearm in October 2018, despite, quote, knowing he was an unlawful user of and addicted to a controlled substance, a charge for which he has agreed to enter a pretrial diversion agreement to avoid a prosecution. David Weiss's office said the investigation into Hunter Biden is ongoing, although his attorney, Chris Clark, said in a statement that it was his understanding that the 5-year investigation into Hunter is resolved as a result of this agreement. That reporting from United Press International. U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, spoke to reporters about the agreement and what happens now with the House's own investigation of Hunter Biden and President Biden's overseas business dealings.
My first reaction is it continues to show the two-tier system in America. If you are the president's leading political opponent, the DOJ tries to literally put you in jail and give you prison time. If you are the president's son, you get a sweetheart deal. Now, this does nothing to our investigation. It actually should enhance our investigations because the DOJ should not be able to withhold any information now, saying that because of pending investigation, they should be able to provide Chairman Comer with any information that he requires.
But Mr. Speaker, this is a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney that's held over into this administration. Why won't you accept
It's
that
done.
this is a thorough investigation and to just accept it on its merits given the person who investigated?
It was a thorough investigation.
Why would you accept it? I'm asking you.
But I'm asking you. So you believe it's a thorough investigation?
I'm asking you.
Do you think it's equal and fair that a political opponent is going to be given jail time, but a presidential son, and if you compare this to other individuals in America that have these same accusations against them, same crimes that they had been guilty of, that they were proposed to have 10 years another time period? I think that's a difference in justice.
What about the Trump attorney? What about the fact there's a Trump attorney?
Speaker McCarthy, you said this has no impact on the investigations from House Republicans. So what can the American people expect from Republicans going forward?
Continue to follow whatever information leads us to. We've watched time and again. I mean, remember what we have found so far. That the president's family builds nothing, owns no offices, but we found out, lo and behold, even though the FBI tried to hold from us, that in a 1023 form, that people have said that they had to pay the president's family money for favors. We now found later, by suspicious activities through banks, how many American families have ever had that happen to them.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, speaking with reporters in the hallway of the U.S. Capitol building today. Hunter Biden's attorney, Chris Clark, was interviewed on MSNBC.
5 years. NBC reports at times this was a counterintelligence investigation, that this was an investigation to FARA violations, which is how you register to work with a foreign government if you're an American citizen, money laundering. Again, 5 years, and what they came up with is 2 misdemeanor tax counts.
That's the resolution we have, is that Mr. Biden's going to take responsibility for failing to timely pay his taxes for those 2 years. And there's going to be a diversion with regard to this 10-day period that he possessed a gun. And that is how the case is going to be resolved.
You heard Speaker McCarthy, I just played it a moment ago, him saying that this is proof that there are two versions of justice and that this is a slap on the wrist and President Biden is being politically persecuted. What's your response to that?
Again, this was a 5-year, very diligent investigation pursued by incredibly professional prosecutors, some of whom have been career prosecutors, one of whom at least was appointed by President Trump. And no one has ever said they're not competent, good, or diligent. I haven't heard anyone say that. It would be false to say that. And this is the resolution that was come to after 5 years.
McCarthy was saying that if you look at other cases where the violations are similar, there's jail time, there's much more, there are more consequences, stricter consequences than what Hunter Biden is facing. Is this a sweetheart deal?
You know, I've heard Speaker McCarthy say a lot of stuff I don't agree with. There was no basis for what he said, and he's not right.
Chris Clark, attorney for Hunter Biden, on MSNBC with Katie Tur. Congressman James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, the Oversight and Accountability Committee chair, tweeting, Hunter Biden is getting away with a slap on the wrist when growing evidence uncovered by the House Oversight Committee reveals the Bidens engaged in a pattern of corruption, influence peddling, and possibly bribery. President Biden was asked by a reporter today if he has spoken with his son.
I'm very proud of my son.
President Biden today in San Francisco. Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland, the ranking Democrat on the Oversight Committee, putting out a statement. This development reflects the Justice Department's continued institutional independence in following the evidence of actual crimes and enforcing the rule of law, even in the face of constant criticism and heckling by my GOP colleagues who think that the system of justice should only follow their partisan wishes. Oversight Committee Republicans have advanced debunked conspiracy theories about President Biden and are now again wailing about the work of a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney. Meanwhile, our colleagues have refused to investigate Jared Kushner and Donald Trump's recent receipt of billions of dollars from autocratic regimes after handing them a string of outrageous policy favors and concessions. That statement from Congressman Jamie Raskin. And White House spokesperson Ian Sams putting out a statement. The President and First Lady love their son and support him as he continues to rebuild his life. We will have no further comment. Former President Donald Trump posting on Truth Social, his social media site, wow, the corrupt Biden DOJ just cleared up hundreds of years of criminal liability by giving Hunter Biden a mere traffic ticket. Our system is broken. Also today, the Florida federal judge overseeing Donald Trump's criminal trial over his keeping allegedly classified documents has set a preliminary trial date of August 14th. All pretrial motions must be filed by the attorneys by July 24th. This is Washington Today. The Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, tells the Wall Street Journal ahead of Thursday's state visit to the U.S. there is an unprecedented trust between the leaders of India and the U.S. Also, he says our two countries are collaborating to further our shared vision of a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. And he says the state visit will reinforce our ties based on shared values of democracy, diversity, and freedom. Together we stand stronger in meeting the shared global challenges. John Kirby, spokesperson for the White House National Security Council, talked about the state visit today at a news conference at the Washington Foreign Press Center at the State Department.
As you all know, this is a big week here at the White House as the President and First Lady welcome the Prime Minister of India for an official state visit and dinner. It's only the third such state dinner and visit of this administration. This visit will affirm the deep and close partnership between the United States and India and the warm bonds of family and friendship that link Americans and Indians together. The visit will strengthen our two countries' shared commitment to a free, open, prosperous, and secure Indo-Pacific, and our shared resolve to elevate our strategic technology partnership, including in defense, clean energy, and space. The leaders will discuss ways to further expand our educational exchanges and people-to-people ties, as well as our work together to confront common challenges from climate change to workforce development and health security. as the world's oldest and largest democracies and as key net security providers in the Indo-Pacific. The United States and India are increasingly partners of first resort as a combined force for global good. India will be a critical strategic partner for the United States in the coming decades. India's growing commitment to playing a more engaged international role, including in the Indo-Pacific Quad, demonstrates a new and growing willingness to join the United States to protect and advance a shared vision of a free, open, and rules-based global order.
John Kirby, spokesperson for the National Security Council at the Washington Foreign Press Center at the State Department today, part of his opening statement about the state visit this week from the Indian Prime Minister. He was also asked about concerns from some about India's human rights record.
It is commonplace and consistent for President Biden to raise concerns over human rights wherever he goes around the world and whatever leaders he's speaking to. Human rights are a foundational element of this administration's foreign policy, and you can certainly expect that that the president will, as he always does, and as you can do with friends and partners like Prime Minister Modi in India, raise our concerns about that.
John Kirby, a strategic communications coordinator for the National Security Council, speaking with reporters at the Washington Foreign Press Center. More on the Indian Prime Minister's visit to Washington this week with Patricia Zengerle, a foreign policy and national security reporter who covers Congress for Reuters, joining us now by phone. Thanks for being with us. You are reporting that a lot of members of Congress are concerned about human rights in India and want this issue raised when the Prime Minister comes to Washington. What are the details?
This morning, a group of 75 of them, members of the House and Senate, all Democrats, sent a letter to the White House, to Biden, asking him to bring up these issues with Modi during his visit. In the letter, they talk about how they're glad the visit is happening and they want close ties between the United States and India, but they list what they see as human rights infractions or concerns by India, and they say, as longtime supporters of a strong U.S.-India relationship, we also believe that friends can and should discuss their differences in an honest and forthright way. That is why we respectfully request that, in addition to the many areas of shared interest between India and the U.S., you also raise directly with Prime Minister Modi areas of concern.
What specific human rights violations do they say might be occurring in India?
When the State Department released their country report, they do this every March, reviewing human rights practices. They listed India as tightening political rights and free expression. And they also raised concerns. The State Department raised concerns in its report on international religious freedom in India for 2022, citing religious intolerance toward minorities and religiously motivated violence by both private actors but also state actors. And then Reporters Without Borders, the international press freedom group, says that India, which once was known for having a dynamic and vibrant free press, has fallen in its rankings of press freedom. And there's another group called Access Now, which tracks how often a government shuts down access to the internet. And India, for 5 years in a row, has led the world in shutting down access to the internet. Those are some of the things they list in the letter.
We're talking with Patricia Zengerle from Reuters. Why is the Indian Prime Minister having this state visit to the U.S. now?
Well, the United States, and Biden in particular, sees India as a potential partner in its efforts to push back against China. And by having Modi come in, it cements that relationship, and they're really rolling out the red carpet for him. There's the state dinner. He's been invited to address a joint meeting of Congress for the second time. And he's even leading a yoga day at the UN before he landed in New York today, and he's leading a yoga day at the UN before he flies to Washington for his meetings. So it's not just a visit, and it's not even just a state visit, but he's getting the whole treatment. And I think that they want India as a partner with everything going on in the world. And there's also some concerns about India's relationship with Russia. India is still buying Russian oil. India is traditionally a defense partner of Russia. During the Cold War, the United States viewed India as being perhaps more on the Russian side. So there's an effort to pull them into more of the U.S. sphere, more than they are. Obviously, they already are. And tighten the relationship. I'm sure there'll be some private conversations about things that I'm not even touching on. And also, Modi is visiting with a lot of CEOs while he's here to talk about a lot of industry and technology, and perhaps giving India access to the kind of technology that the United States only makes available to partners that it trusts. Again, kind of another honor extended to New Delhi.
What else are you going to be following when the Prime Minister visits?
We're going to be looking at the general message of deepening ties. There's a very large Indian-American diaspora. And actually, along with the diaspora there are plans for a range of different protests of Modi's visit. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International are going to be showing a documentary about Modi that questioned his leadership during riots in Gujarat in 2002. Because remember, during the George W. Bush's administration, Modi was denied a visa to enter the United States because of concerns about anti-Muslim activity in India. So this is a big change from that time. So we'll be watching the protests. We'll be watching for signs of how close they are. We expect there could be business deals that are announced, especially in these areas I've talked about, technology and defense. Some of the announcements expected are the U.S. approval for General Electric to manufacture engines in India for domestically produced fighter jets, India to purchase some drones made by General Atomics, and generally trade considerations, removing obstacles that make it a bit more difficult for India to trade with the United States in defense and high technology.
Patricia Zengerle is a foreign policy and national security reporter covering Congress for Reuters. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Congressman Scott Perry, Republican from Pennsylvania, posting a short video about the Indian Prime Minister's visit this week.
We are excited to welcome back to a joint session of Congress the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi. Again, later this week for a second time. The United States and India relationship is one of the most consequential and impactful relationships of the 21st century. On behalf of the citizens of the 10th District of Pennsylvania, Mr. Prime Minister, I can't wait to see you, and I'm excited to see you, and I wish you and all the people of India our continued and everlasting friendship. God bless you.
Congressman Scott Perry, Republican from Pennsylvania, posting that video. The C-SPAN networks will be covering the Prime Minister's address to a joint meeting of Congress on Thursday, and then the state dinner at the White House Thursday night. The Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, tweeting, "Leaving for USA, where I will attend programs in New York and Washington, D.C. These programs include Yoga Day celebrations at the United Nations, talks with President Biden, address to the joint session of U.S. Congress, and more. In USA, I will also get the opportunity to meet business leaders, interact with the Indian community, and meet thought leaders from different walks of life. We seek to deepen India-USA ties in key sectors like trade, commerce, innovation, technology, and other such areas. Those tweets from the Indian Prime Minister. At the Pentagon today, the Principal Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh was asked about military relations among the U.S., India, and Russia.
As you know, the Prime Minister Modi is expected to visit this week. India has contracted for 5 squadrons of S-400s from Russia. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about whether DoD has continuing concerns about India's acquisition of Russian weapons and any plans to push back on that or urge sanctions under CAATSA, anything like that?
Sure. So again, we welcome President Modi's visit to the United States this week. Secretary Austin visited India just 2 weeks ago and was able to meet with his counterpart there. What we always will continue to urge our allies and partners around the world is to avoid transactions with Russia. We remain deeply confident in India's diversification of equipment. And over the past decade, our proposals for industrial cooperation will further integrate the U.S. and Indian defense industries. So I think I'll just leave it at that.
Can you speak a little bit as to why the U.S. ended up taking certain measures against Turkey for getting S-400s, whereas they've not taken such actions against India? Could you speak a little bit to why different countries are being treated differently?
Again, we encourage all of our partners and allies to avoid transactions with Russia. That's something that we've continued to reiterate with Turkey, with India, and with others. I think they are very different and two different cases. And when it comes to India, we remain confident in their diversification of equipment and our ability to integrate with them as well.
Sabrina Singh is the Pentagon Principal Deputy Press Secretary, part of her news conference at the Pentagon. Reuters has an article that the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said on Tuesday that Moscow had information that Ukraine was planning to strike Russian-controlled Crimea with longer-range U.S. and British missiles and warned Russia would retaliate if that happened. He told a meeting of military officials the use of these missiles outside the zone of our special military operation would mean that the United States and Britain would be fully dragged into the conflict and would entail immediate strikes on decision-making centers in Ukraine. That reporting from Reuters. The Wall Street Journal has a headline from this morning. China and Cuba are negotiating to establish a new joint military training facility on the island, sparking alarm in Washington that it would lead to the stationing of Chinese troops and other security and intelligence operations just 100 miles off Florida's coast, according to current and former U.S. officials. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who just spoke with the Chinese President Xi Jinping, visit to Beijing, is now in London holding a joint news conference with the British Foreign Affairs Minister, getting a question about this latest development with China.
We reported that China is preparing a military training facility in Cuba, and was just wondering that the readout of the meeting that you just attended when we were in Beijing said that the two sides discussed China's intelligence activities in Cuba. But I'm wondering, did you discuss with Xi Jinping their military activities in Cuba and whether that kind of action, either in the waters around North America or the waters around China, could affect the detente that has emerged recently between the U.S. and China?
Yes, I made very clear that we would have deep concerns about PRC intelligence or military activities in Cuba. Since the start of this administration, we have engaged a number of countries where we've seen consideration of having some kind of presence by China, intelligence, military, and we've engaged in a number of diplomatic efforts in that regard, and I think they've had some success in slowing down these efforts. This is something we're going to be monitoring very, very closely, and we've been very clear about that, and we will protect our homeland. We will protect our interests.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at a joint news conference in London with the British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Wednesday on C-SPAN Radio, former special counsel John Durham testifies before the House Judiciary Committee on his investigation of the FBI's probe of alleged links between the 2016 Trump presidential campaign and Russian operatives. Our live coverage begins at 9:30 a.m. Eastern, Wednesday. Listen on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app at cspan.org or ask your smart speaker to play C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. The anniversary of the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, the one that overturned the Roe v. Wade constitutional right to an abortion, is Saturday, June 24th. Today, the leader of the House Republican Conference, Elise Stefanik of New York, and the First Lady of the United States, Jill Biden, talked about where abortion stands as an issue 1 year later. Congresswoman Stefanik was at the National Press Club in Washington, a program hosted by the group Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America.
Since Roe was overturned and the Supreme Court restored the correct interpretation of our Constitution, 25 states have life-saving laws on the books. Common sense policies like parental consent laws, limits on late-term abortion, and informed consent provisions that were previously tossed aside by radical activist judges are now protected and enshrined. These efforts have protected the lives of an estimated 181,000 children. Sadly, many Americans took the opposite approach last year, and some of the worst aspects of humanity were on display. There was an unprecedented leak at the Supreme Court meant to intimidate and obstruct the justices, jeopardizing the independence of our political system and severely damaging the reputation of the court. Extremists broke the law and picketed the homes of the justices, plotted to assassinate Justice Kavanaugh, and firebombed scores of pro-life pregnancy centers and vandalized churches that provide support to women, babies, and families. Then Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Majority Leader Chuck Schumer made these incidents worse by slow-walking security protections for justices and refusing to denounce such heinous attacks. Pro-life advocates were beaten by radicals in the streets, illegally targeted by President Biden's FBI, and arrested in their homes with their children present, all for peacefully protesting and standing for life. We saw the loyal stenographers for the far left in the mainstream media promote division and discord, even defending and making excuses for the criminal actions of the extreme pro-abortion activists. This debate is certainly intense, heartfelt, and deeply personal on all sides. But I am so proud that the vast majority of Americans involved in this important conversation continue to conduct themselves in a respectful, meaningful manner that advances the dialogue. We've spoken to our neighbors, organized in churches and community groups, donated to charities, and supported state and federal legislation and candidates. For nearly 50 years under Roe v. Wade, it was this fundamental tenet of free speech and debate that was silenced and sidelined. We should embrace this debate. It provides a moment to rise to the new challenges the life movement faces. It also holds the promise of new and better policies that protect the unborn, encourage and support women, and expect more from fathers. It allows us to argue and win the fact that the right to life is the foundational issue of human rights.
Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, Republican from New York, chair of the House Republican Conference, at the National Press Club today, a Supreme Court Dobbs decision anniversary program held by the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America group. At the White House, First Lady Jill Biden also talking about this anniversary.
Nearly 1 year ago, the Dobbs decision took away women's constitutional rights, their ability to make their own health care decisions. Today, 18 states have abortion bans in effect. And the consequences of these bans go far beyond the right to choose. Women are being denied access to medications that treat arthritis and cancer, even when they aren't pregnant. And survivors of rape, and incest are being forced to travel across state lines for care. Doctors have stopped providing the care that they know is best for their patients because they don't know which procedures are legal. And like those who are with us today, far, far too many women are experiencing devastating consequences to their health, their fertility, and their lives. Turned away from emergency rooms, delayed treatments, mourning loss while barely surviving the resulting infections. The Dobbs decision was devastating, and Joe is doing everything he can do to fight back. But the only way that we can ensure that every woman has the fundamental freedoms she deserves is for Congress to make the protections of Roe v. Wade the law of the land once again. So we've got to make our voices heard for the women whose lives are on the line, and for the fathers and brothers and husbands and sons who love them. We need men in this fight too, which I'm sure you're probably all saying the same thing. Today we're joined by 4 women who are doing just that, speaking up about their experiences. And I know that it isn't easy to relive what you've already gone through. But stories like yours are how we shed light on the cruel and devastating consequences of those bans.
The First Lady Jill Biden at the White House, sitting at a table with those 4 women, 2 from Texas, 1 each from Florida and Louisiana. Also there, Jen Klein, director of the White House Gender Policy Council. Well, more Dobbs decision anniversary events expected this week from Democrats ahead of the anniversary day, which is Saturday. The White House says that First Lady Jill Biden, President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff will be attending a political event with reproductive rights groups on Friday. And in Congress, this from the Washington Examiner, a group of Democrats plan to file a discharge petition sometime this week to advance the Women's Health Protection Act, utilizing an increasingly common mechanism used by Democrats to trigger a floor vote even without support of House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. The legislation would codify abortion rights nationwide before fetal viability, ensuring access to the procedure in every state. That from the Washington Examiner. Discharge petitions need a majority of House members to support them in order to succeed, so that would mean at least 5 Republicans if all Democrats sign. President Biden today in San Francisco talking about artificial intelligence, meeting with researchers and activists. LA Times writes the event comes as his administration attempts to tackle potential dangers of a technology that could fuel misinformation, job losses, discrimination, and privacy violations. And also, President Biden ramps up efforts to raise money for the 2024 re-election bid, including from tech billionaires. And one more line from the LA Times article. Experts President Biden expected to meet with Tuesday include some of big tech's loudest critics. Here's the president.
Early this year, we met with my Council on Science and Technology Advisors and some America's top minds to discuss the possibilities and the risks associated with artificial intelligence. In May, Kamala and I convened the CEOs of American companies foremost involved in AI development to underscore their responsibility in making sure the products are used safely before making them public. The same here today. I want to hear directly from the experts, and these are some of the world's leading experts on this issue and the intersection of technology and society, who can provide a range of perspectives for us and on AI's enormous promise and its risks. As I've said before, we'll see more technological change in the next 10 years than we've seen in the last 50 years, and maybe even beyond that. And AI is already driving that change in every part of American life, often in ways we don't notice. AI is already making it easier to search the internet, helping us drive to our destinations while avoiding traffic in real time. AI is going to change the way we teach, learn, and help solve challenges like disease and climate change, and giving you the time to focus on the things that matter most to you personally. But in seizing this moment, we need to manage the risks to our society, to our economy, and our national security. My administration is committed to safeguarding America's rights and safety, from protecting privacy to addressing bias and disinformation, to making sure AI systems are safe before they are released. Last October, we proposed an AI Bill of Rights to ensure that important protections were built into the AI systems from the very start. Earlier this year, I signed an executive order to direct my cabinet to root out bias in the design and use of AI. And in May, we announced a new strategy for funding for responsible AI development, so Americans can lead the way and drive breakthroughs in this critical area, from cybersecurity to public health to agriculture to education, and quite frankly, so much more. Social media has already shown us the harm and powerful technology can do without the right safeguards in place. That's why I said at the State of the Union that Congress needs to pass bipartisan privacy legislation to impose strict limits on personal data collection, ban targeting advertising to our children, and require companies to put health and safety first.
President Biden today in San Francisco. From Gizmodo.com, two U.S. senators are joining hands across the aisle to try to separate artificial intelligence from the rest of the Internet. Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, and Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, have introduced new legislation that, if passed, would exempt AI from Section 230 protections. The proposed bill would leave AI companies potentially liable for the often correct, and then in parentheses, the article has TBD, maybe sometimes defamatory, content that large language models and other generative AI tools produce. The measure, straightforwardly titled No Section 230 Immunity for AI Act, comes as the question of who holds accountability for AI's creations is being hotly debated, with no clear legal answer yet. That was from Gizmodo.com. Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, speaking today at a program on Section 230 reform held by the organization New America, and asked about that bill.
You talk about, colleagues from the Democratic Party teaming up with colleagues on the right. We have a prime example of that with Senator Josh Hawley and Richard Blumenthal putting out a bill last week that would strip 230 protections from AI-generated works. Now, we don't even know exactly what that means or what that would look like in practice, but that would be pretty spooky for a company like OpenAI or Meta that are working on these generative products. I'm sure they wouldn't support a bill like that. What do you think of that effort?
Well, our 230 law was about hosting. That was the core kind of principle. It was not about generating content. And so I'm already on record as saying that when you're talking about ChatGPT, for example, which is being integrated into popular digital services and the like, it shouldn't be protected by Section 230. Now, the Hawley-Blumenthal bill, I've already said that I'm not for protecting generative content. I think we ought to wait a little bit and think through what the implications are before we go out writing bills. Also, I think there needs to be some effort to define generative AI. As it stands, it could be read to include search engines, which I've said before should be seen as distinct from generative AI chatbots. If you withhold Section 230 immunity from search engines, I think that'd be a disaster for all of us who care about users and speech and the like. So I don't see a big rush to move here. The Congress already has a to-do list on the technology front that we know are real problems, and you've already heard me say, right up at the top of it, is we ought to pass a major federal privacy law. I don't know if you saw, I was able to get declassified information from the Director of National Intelligence with respect to all the commercially available information. Read that analysis. I'll tell you, because we've all been working in these tech precincts, that report basically outlines how the government is in a position to collect almost as much information as people were talking about back in the John Poindexter days of total information awareness. So I just want to say the top priority ought to be passing a federal privacy law and also passing my Algorithm Accountability Act, because that would make automated decision systems more accountable.
So you're not entirely opposed to the idea that companies that have products like ChatGPT and Bard should be held responsible for the content that those generative AI products are spitting out?
Yeah, look, the 230 bill was to protect hosting. It was not to protect generative, content kinds of information. And my colleague, Chris Cox, my colleague and friend, says, if you're talking about something which even in part is generating new content, no protection.
Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, today at a program hosted by the group New America, referring to Chris Cox, a former Republican congressman from California. Together they wrote Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. A Reuters article explains that section provides broad protection to interactive computer services by holding that they cannot be treated as the publisher or speaker of information provided by users, and that a small set of narrow exceptions have been established for issues like copyright infringement and child sex trafficking. Wall Street today, the Dow down 245, NASDAQ down 22, S&P down 20. Congressman Mike Rogers, Republican from Alabama, tweeting today, on American Eagle Day, we celebrate the majestic bald eagle that has served as our nation's symbol since 1782. I am especially proud of the Auburn University College of Veterinary Medicine's conservation efforts through the Raptor Center to protect these amazing animals. Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Jack Davis's latest book is The Bald Eagle, The Improbable Journey of America's Bird, and he was on C-SPAN 2's Book TV last year talking about how the bald eagle came to be the nation's symbol.
It required 6 years, 3 congressional committees, and 14 men, delegates in the Continental Congress, as well as consultants and artists, to finally get to this. That committee I mentioned with Jefferson, Adams, and Franklin, that was the first committee that was appointed to design a seal, and they failed miserably. And as did a second committee, as did a third committee. And finally, in 1782, Charles Thompson, who was the secretary of the Continental Congress, took over and said, "We need a seal. We're on the verge of becoming a legitimately independent nation. We're gonna beat the pants off the British here in another couple of years, and we don't have a national seal, and we need one." So he's the one who proposed putting the bald eagle on the national seal. Now, eagles on coats of arms and national coats of arms and nation seals date back to the ancients, the Greeks and the Romans. But all those eagles preceding this one are non-ornithological. They are just your generic eagle figure, and that represent no particular species. And so this is the first one that represents an actual species. And Thompson insisted that it be a bald eagle, or as he called it, an American bald eagle, be put on the seal.
Jack Davis, author of The Bald Eagle, The Improbable Journey of America's Bird, on C-SPAN 2's Book TV in 2022 at the Books and Books bookstore in Coral Gables, Florida. And today is National American Eagle Day. On this day in 1782, the eagle became the nation's symbol. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.